gives you the signal that he's.
We're good. We're live. We're good to go.
And Madam Chair, for the record, if you can do a roll call by name of everyone who's
Just-
present.
Have them say who.
Everybody say their name out loud.
Yeah.
We'll
Thank
start
you.
down here.
Richard Winters, Buddy Cahill,
Jennifer Debnam.
Catherine Abramavich.
Jeff Pettit.
Okay. Does anybody have any corrections to the minutes? Motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Then I guess the first thing we have up is the zoning text amendment, the application for review.
Yep.
And you're presenting that, I suppose?
So we have a citizen-initiated zoning text amendment to add a new special exception to what we'll call sort of the the residential districts. So agricultural zoning district, rural character, rural residential, community residential, and village initially. We'll get to that in a minute. To add seasonal outdoor retreat. This application has been reviewed by the Planning Commission, and it had an initial review. There were some questions and concerns by the Planning Commission. The applicant went back, and we met together, and they made some refinements, and that's what is sort of on the page 2 and page 3 of the packet. You can see, I think there's a red text version that shows the changes that they made between the meetings to address some of those Planning Commission concerns. Because this is a use that would be allowed in the agricultural zoning district, it is appropriate for the Agricultural Advisory Committee to, if you so choose, to offer a recommendation to the county commissioners on the adoption. If you have concerns or additional questions, we can either try to answer those. Concerns can be raised in your recommendation. And I will kind of, the seasonal outdoor, actually, I'll automatically start by saying that it was seasonal outdoor retreat. There were concerns about how seasonal might be interpreted. So one of the changes that was made is that it is strictly an outdoor retreat. The use is intended to kind of fit within some of the other lodging uses that are already in the zoning district, what the applicant would like to do and would like to have allowed on other properties doesn't really fit. So that's why she came up with sort of what works for her kind of vision. And again, it applies to a bunch of other zoning districts. So I don't know if you want me to go through the provisions in detail or if you want to just ask questions.
Do you have an example of this in some place that's already in existence?
I'm not aware of one. I think the closest thing that I would say this resembles is what a lot of people refer to as glamping. So her kind of vision is that there would be kind of these pod units, tiny houses, yurts, whatever you might kind of want to call them, that would allow guests to have some place to sleep. But she envisions that there would be community bathhouses and sort of a community kitchen cookout kind of area. There'd be like a community fire circle. So it's not people bringing in their own equipment to go camping, but it's also not a hotel. So it's kind of, does that sort of help you understand?
That's what I thought.
So guest units would be defined as like a temporary structure and or a tiny home?
They would be defined as they are not intended to be, they are intended for guests who would use them as periodic transient occupancy. So, I mean, they could be designed for occupancy year-round and have heating and air conditioning, but would not be for anybody to use as a permanent residence. Obviously, they would have to meet any kind of applicable building code. And this would be considered a commercial use, so, you know, if somebody's building a structure, it would have to meet the commercial building code.
Could it also be tents?
Yurt.
Yes, it could be a yurt, but it would not be people bringing in their own tents. It would not be people bringing in their own RVs. So it is meant to be, everything is provided by whoever is hosting it on their, whoever puts it on their property. But it is transient in nature. Is that?
You mean like Camp Tagwar or Echo
I guess,
or little cabins?
little cabins, it could be, like I said, it could be platform tents, it could be cabins. What is envisioned by this use, and you can see some of the things that are listed in here, is that there is a limit on the number of guest units on the site, and I believe that there is the special exception would have a maximum occupancy of 2 adult guests and 2 additional children. So they're not meant to be large, full dwellings.
Can you explain to me, it says the project consists of at least 10 acres?
That means your property would have to be at least 10 acres before you could come seek approval
Okay,
for
that
one.
means the whole property, not this,
Not just the area of use, but that the
okay,
the
because it
parcel
said the
itself.
project, and I was thinking, it means the property.
It does. There has been a lot of discussion as to how that should be worded.
Okay,
The language that was provided by the applicant is consistent with other similar special exceptions or other kind of lodging special exceptions in the land use ordinance. And I did not print out the planning commission letter. The planning commission changed that, didn't they?
We can pull that.
Okay. I believe that the planning commission also did not like collectively consist and made a recommendation for something slightly different.
well, to me, the word project is confusing, like, it should be the parcel has to be a certain size, not the project. Like, the tents and the buildings are supposed to take at least 10 acres, like, they couldn't just take up,
They could certainly take less. The intent is that it's the parcel and that it is an individual parcel that is 10 acres, not that you could own 3 4-acre parcels and collectively you have 10 acres, that each individual parcel is 10 acres and you can have one of these per parcel. Because there was a lot of concern as to, can somebody have approval for 2 separate outdoor retreats, and so effectively have 30 units on one property? And the answer is no,
No matter what size that property.
no matter what size that property.
I see.
so you say there's already changed of the language has already changed somewhat?
I believe Mr. Mackey has gone to get the recommendation from the planning commission. We should have included that. And I believe that the planning commission recommended that be changed, that be clarified. The planning commission recommended that the village district not be included. The idea being that in the village, you've got more dense development and that maybe this type of a use would not be appropriate, even if you had a 10-acre parcel. And I believe there were some recommended changes to letter I, dealing with how additional events could be handled.
I also had a question that says that they may contain bathroom accommodations. It's not mandatory?
Where are you at? Under
It's
the
up
definition?
at the top of the page under the
Okay.
definition. So it says it may contain outdoor recreational accommodations, dining facilities, and bathroom, which I think that's all saying it may, it may, it may. Which, I'm thinking, if you're gonna have 60 people, like, don't you have to have?
Yes, you would have to have bathroom accommodations.
Or does that cover where it says you have to meet all health department? It says that somewhere.
This language has also been much discussed. This is, the intent is that the bathrooms can either be part of the individual guest units, or they can be sort of a more shared bathhouse facility, whether it's,
You mean it's
one.
an option? Is that
Yes.
the way okay.
That's the person who initiated this envisions having shared bathhouses. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who does this would have to follow that.
But they would be required to have
Yes.
restroom.
Yes. In whether,
Okay,
if you're providing overnight accommodations, you have to provide.
okay, good.
Another question, is it being listed as an outdoor retreat? Is this for like corporate entities to come have a retreat, or private individuals want to get out to the country to retreat? Or is this could be used for a facility to house in transit of illegals or immigrants coming in?
No.
Or for rehab for drug use?
No. This is meant to, somewhere I thought there was, the guest occupancy is limited to 2 weeks. This is meant to be sort of, I'm gonna call it recreational lodging. I mean, so if a corporate entity wanted to rent all of the guest units to have a retreat for their whoever, they could. You could also have individual families, your family rents a unit, my family rents a unit, we're strangers, we don't know each other, so,
I feel like this is just a nice way to put, like, I want to put 15 Airbnbs on my farm. And so I saw back here, there's one of the amendments was short-term vacation rentals is being changed in each one of these, like, little
That's in the land.
checkboxes.
That's in the next, that's in the land use
no,
ordinance.
but, I mean,
Yeah.
Does it go, though? Does it coincide with that change?
no.
Okay.
This really began as, if you were to look at the special exceptions we have, things or uses, a bed and breakfast is considered a home occupation and is limited to 3 rooms within your house, up to, we have country inns, we have resorts, conference centers, we have a different type of retreat where that's envisioned more as the guest rooms are within a single facility, so like a lodge kind of facility. And none of those lodging uses fit what this particular individual wants to do, which is to have individual units where guests are staying and sort of have that centralized cookout kitchen, community kitchen type facility, and community bathrooms. So that's why we said, okay, we can't fit you into something we have so that you can apply to do this use. Your next best option is design a use we can add to the land use ordinance that fits your vision.
Okay.
And there's been a whole lot of discussion on this, much more than I ever anticipated, as to what all of these things mean, how it could be envisioned, how it might be applied. I guess
You
that.
opened a can of worms. You opened up a can of worms.
I think so. I mean, I think we do actually have, this person is not the only person who has ever called us and said, hey, I had a business contact me. They want to set up 3 tents on my property and then, use a reservation system to let people come stay on my farm. we don't have a use that allows this. So honestly, this outdoor retreat would allow the landowner who does want to have glamping on his property, set it up and do it. You know, you do have to meet all of kind of the building codes, health department regulations, so you're gonna have to have water, you're gonna have to have sanitation. You know, if there's any other kind of building code that's applicable, you know, we'll have to meet that. So you can't just set up a tent in your backyard and, you know, go, okay, I've set up a reservation system, I have my outdoor retreat. And so from that standpoint, it is more regulated than an Airbnb, because this use does require that you go to the Board of Appeals to get your special exception. There's a whole list of sort of general conditions that special exceptions have to meet. We look at effect on the surrounding property, proximity to public uses, effect on historic structures, impact to natural habitats. So there's a whole bunch of other general things that go through, and this will require site plan review. So it will come to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission will go, okay, yep, your layout looks good, you've got enough parking, you have your screening, Health Department will review it. So I think from that standpoint, it is, like I said, it is more regulated, it is more, you know, scrutinized than just somebody setting up an Airbnb out of their house.
So to follow up, I'm sorry, to follow up on your question, I don't doubt that this is legit and this person wants to do that, but anytime you introduce something like this, there's always the possibility that someone is going to try to take advantage of the system. So what provisions are in place to police the 2-week stay? And what's to keep you and I from getting in cahoots, and they stay 2 weeks at your place, and these transients stay 2 weeks at my place? And then they go back and stay 2 weeks at your place, and back and stay 2 weeks at my place. And we end up with a homeless community. That's the last thing we want to do, is start changing the demographics of this farmland. I come from my view is, if there's a way to violate the law, someone's going to do it. From a policing standpoint, if there's a way around it, someone's going to do it. So that was my question initially, was, you know, what's to keep someone from where they're trying to help the homeless or help those with substance abuse. This is a cheap place to house them versus a motel.
Honestly, you don't know that. I mean,
Right, so how do we
until
police it?
somebody sets one of these up and they set whatever their rates are, you know, they might charge $200 a night. I mean, because they think they have something that special. You know, it'll depend on what the market can bear. I think, though, that you're correct. There have certainly been questions raised as to enforcement. A lot of our enforcement is complaint-driven, so we'd have to become aware that there might be a problem. But then if there is, because it has been approved by the Board of Appeals and there will be a set of conditions that outline what those parameters are, we've got a way to actually go enforce it. So.
There is a high-value dollar industry of people that want to come out, experience farm life, stay on a farm, go see some animals, or even like almost like a dude ranch type thing, but only
Right.
not a cattle ranch, but other types of farming. I've had people approach me that had bed and breakfasts and asked if I would bring a cow or a calf to their place for the day so people could see what a calf was and pet it and all that type of stuff. I haven't done it because of biosecurity reasons, health reasons. But it is, it's not a cheap industry. They charge top dollar. If that's what this is, it could be a good thing to let people get a visual and experience what agriculture really is.
And it might not even be agriculture. It might just be somebody who has a wooded property. you know, and there are plenty of people who want to be able to get out into the woods and are looking for some alternative to staying in a bed and breakfast or a hotel. So, I mean, I think what we're looking for from you is, do you think that this is compatible or not compatible within the agricultural zoning district? If there are concerns as to the potential effect on the agricultural zoning district and sort of the ag industry, are there recommendations you would like to make for additional provisions that we should, you know, send along to the county commissioners to include in this that you think are necessary to protect the ag industry? You know, are there, and I mean, that's kind of generally what your focus is, but obviously if you as a body have other concerns as well, we'll certainly pass them all along. It doesn't have to be limited to that. You can, you make your motion and decision and, as a group, so.
I assume this wouldn't be permitted on ag preservation or this historic trust or rural legacy deed properties. I don't think it would be allowed, to my understanding, in any one of them that I could think of.
It would be based on the provisions of the easement. It would be based on, ag tourism is allowed on many of the easements. There are limits within the easements as to how much area can be utilized for that agritourism and whether or not it's got to have some component related to the farm, but it's not a flat out, no, this would not be allowed on ag preservation. It would be something that would have to be reviewed by the individual easement holder as to whether or not it fit their regulations.
This may be something the county should check with the state on each type of easement.
Well, when somebody would come to apply to do this, that's when we would start looking at that. So, I mean, we're not going to move forward to the Board of Appeals with something that we know needs approval from another organization if we don't already have that approval.
You'll cross that bridge when you get there.
Well, many
There was
easements
policy,
vary.
there was policy at the 2022 Farm Bureau Convention, State Convention. There were other counties that brought this forward that wanted to be able to do, it was more camping. I don't think it allowed for, and we just talk about it in general terms, to go into Farm Bureau policy. It doesn't get into any kind of detail like this. But the way I remember it being presented was more camp, like not a permanent kind of structure with heat and air conditioning. It was definitely more of a tent basis, which I think would be less room for abuse than a heated and air-conditioned structure that was permanent. So I think the camping part is fine, but I do think there is room for it to be abused. And I guess we need a motion. Do we allow questions from the audience?
That's up to you, Madam Chair.
We have a hand raised in the back.
I didn't know if this was allowed at your committee or not.
It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
I don't remember having an audience ever before.
Jenna Christensen Lewis. I think what hasn't been presented here is that the Planning Commission put forth a positive recommendation, sort of, with a whole slew of caveats, which maybe we're going to get at some point in time, but don't have them right now. I will say that Governor Hogan signed a bill into legislature to add camping to agritourism, and there have been counties in the state of Maryland that have put forth camping amendments to their text. Anne Arundel is a prime example of what they did. In order to have, it wasn't permanent structures. They can have people come in and pay to camp on agricultural land as long as, in the bill that Anne Arundel passed, as long as it is in conjunction with educational outreach from teaching people about farming, teaching people about it, they can stay there. And that is what they put forward specifically in their article. And their whole bill put forth what agritourism, they could have special events, how many times a year they could have special events. It's a really well-written text amendment that puts this forward. They can, let's see, you can stay on an agricultural site, you can camp on it, you can pay for it, it has to be a minimum of 10 acres. Parking, it has to have 100-foot setbacks, and it has to be in conjunction with education on farming. So this particular amendment has been brought forth, and as you can tell, it is geared towards one person, but the problem with it is that it's going to apply to every piece of parcel in the county, basically. So we're taking one person's vision of what she wants to do, which I'm sure is a wonderful thing that she wants to do, but then we're broadcasting it and allowing people all across our county in all of these different zoning districts to apply the same zoning text for their property. You could have these set up all next to each. I mean, there's no definition on how many there can be in the county. There's no definition on how close they can be together. So you could have these cabins dotting our countryside on our farms. And it's my recommendation, and what I hope you would adopt, is to withdraw the agricultural zone out of this and send it back to the drawing board. That will not impact Miss Donnelly. She is in rural residential, even though she's on a parcel that it gets an agricultural easement. She's still in I think she's rural residential, is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. It will not affect whatever she's trying to do, but it would eliminate putting this on so many different parcels or so much land within Kent County, and go back to the drawing board and actually craft something that would help farmers, that would bring people here for the right reasons for camping, not putting on our prime agricultural land, not letting people build little cabins all over the place, but let people come in, let them put in a campsite, let them do some education on farming, let it be part of the agritourism, craft something that's really a good bill that would be a benefit to Kent County farmers and not this particular text amendment. And that's just my recommendation. The University of Maryland actually was the one that got Governor Hogan to put forth, I think they had a lot to do with it, and they have they did a presentation, it's right here. It's called Farm Camping Preliminary Research. But this was done by the Harry Hughes Center, and I can pass this forward to you guys. And this is the Anne Arundel bill. I know that you don't have time to read this right now when you're in a meeting, but here's
That bill was just, am I getting this right? That's just for, it's not permanent structures, it's just tents or something,
Right,
correct?
it's camping. It's agritourism.
But
which
we're
would-
talking about permanent structures. I just want to make sure I've got everything straight in my head here.
We're talking, I think, probably about both.
Okay.
That would be up to the individual property owner when they come to apply.
And this only deals with, Anne Arundel's only deals with agricultural property. It doesn't deal, if you're getting an agricultural easement and you're in rural residential or some of the other areas, you can do this, but it really just applies to agricultural property. And I would just say that AZD should be removed from the text amendment. That's all. After having listened to this whole discussion and how convoluted, this was put together by lawyers for the person that wants to do it. And therefore, it's very beneficial for her, but I don't know that it's beneficial for Kent County as a whole, given that it applies to so many different properties. Thank you for letting me talk. Sorry, I took so long.
Anne Arundel's required an agricultural education portion.
Yes, they do. I'll leave that there for you if you want it.
You can ask if anybody else wants to speak.
Oh, does anybody else want to have a comment?
I have a comment. I'm on the phone.
Okay.
Holy.
I guess you could figure that out, that I'm not sitting there. This is Judy Gifford, and I want to second Janet's brilliant suggestion to pull out AZD because, as she said, this is one person's proposal that's going to be spread county-wide, and it is so sloppy, and there's so many holes in it. I feel like every meeting there's more people trying to put their fingers in this dike that they haven't even, foretold what it's going to be. There's so many questions. I just can't see how anybody could in good conscience approve this as a text amendment for the whole county when there's so many studies out there that haven't been looked at, so much research already been done, so many model requirements that we should have looked at and considered, that I really think this is not ready for prime time. And if you pull out the AZD, maybe Mrs. Donnelly can get this sooner rather than having to wait for another cycle, and that would be fine. But to pass it as an ADZ, I think is unconscionable. Thank you.
Anybody else have comments?
Please come forward so we can make sure we pick you
I
up.
won't be able to hear you otherwise.
Peter
on the
Brown.
recording.
I just came back from Wisconsin where they do have this, but it's not on agricultural land. But they do have this cabin thing, and everybody uses it. I mean, every second mile out there, somebody has a lodge, they have cabins, they have this, all on lakes and everything else, but it is gone widespread. I mean, it's everywhere out there. So if you're going to do this, and it is going to be countywide, it does have a tendency for people to come in and abuse it, especially as more people have monetary concerns living in cities and want to get out. And they come out of a tiny house, and a farmer, has his waste area or, area for a watershed or whatever, and he can put a little tiny homes on it, which are readily available. And you can, you can dot them. I don't know what the proposed number of cabins is, at the 10. But you could do that, and you could make, quite a substantial, subsidy or living from doing it. But what would it be? Would it do, as she said, would it just dot the entire area? For one person wanting to do it, does that open the door to a floodgate of people just going, I want to make some extra income, let me put a bunch of little cabins all there in place? And then they would eventually turn into, like I said, so, a little time here, a little time there, we'll change the law a little bit, then the zoning changes, and then you can do it like that. And then what if squatters' rights, the renters' rights, people that don't want to move, they get in. So just the small considerations. I came from a place that they do it seasonally in Wisconsin.
Was it done tastefully out there, or what was
For
your
the most
opinion?
part,
Most part?
For the most part.
But did it look like it had been abused in some areas?
some
or-
areas.
Yeah, okay, which with human beings always
Some
happens.
areas. It got a little overcrowded, and then the stores and everything else, bringing a lot of extra population, vehicle troubles, and then infrastructure again, and civil engineering. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
There's really no way to limit the number within a zone or anything, right? Because you're gonna step on somebody, if you allow it and allow this person to do it, you couldn't just say within, I don't know, one of the voting districts, you could only be 3 of them or something like that. Is that,
Your role is to make recommendations to the county commissioner, so you can certainly recommend anything you want. Those kind of provisions would receive legal review by their council, before adoption, but you all are free to recommend whatever you think would be appropriate. And I don't know how Carla feels about this, but I would just like to say that it's not our application, et cetera. This is applicant initiative, but I certainly have no objection to the removal of AZD, so.
I think that may be very wise. I think on AZD, if you have an individual building or structure that's, have guests come to the farm, experience farm life is one thing. But when you got 8, 10, 5 structures that you gotta have somebody there all the time, it can be, I think it could be, get out of control. And keep it in the, where the lady wants to put it, and not on AZD, on the agricultural land, I think is the great we go. I make a motion to have the AZD removed from it.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Is that unanimous? Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Is that,
Do we need to add the other two people to our roll call?
That would be great, yes.
So we need to add Valerie and Johnny.
Okay, thank you. All righty, the next item on the agenda is sort of a, I hesitate to characterize what it is, but in a way, it's sort of a preview. We expect this to be submitted. We know that lots of things are going on with you all for agriculture, and we didn't want to have 2 meetings if you didn't want to have 2 meetings. So in this case, there is a proposed text amendment that we, has it been submitted formally?
no, it hasn't been submitted
Okay.
formally.
But it's sort of, it's a different sort of situation. So this is language directly out of the proposed land use ordinance that you are taking a look at. And the goal of this applicant is to simply advance this language ahead of time so that they would be able to move forward with a property.
And we're on a page that looks like
I'm
this.
sorry, yes.
It's got a text box. It says that the subject is proposed item, advanced copy. We're all on the same page now?
So you all would be talking about this item as part of the land use ordinance anyway. And so we wanted to just single out that this particular portion is going to be moved forward, and wanted to get your sort of focused response on this if possible, so that you all would not have to come back and meet again if you did not wish to. Since we know that the applicant's plan is to just take the proposed text and bring it forward now. Carl. And just to note, this is related to the former animal shelter. That property has been on the market for some time. You know, there's been a number of interested folks, and with this property and other properties, we keep running into the same issue, that properties that are under 20 acres, they can't be a farm. We don't consider them a farm. If they have an existing structure like an old church or some other structure that's no longer being used for that purpose, there's very little that can be done with it. So the idea was, this language was, when we were instructed, sort of streamline the process and, you know, take a look at the sort of boundaries of what needs to be handled. The idea of this is it allows a special exception, so it gets reviewed by Planning Commission, Board of Appeals. It's not just a yes, but that someone could propose to reuse an existing structure with a use that might not be permitted in the rest of AZD, but that it might be appropriate for that building. You think of a realtor's office, you know, some of those uses where that building really isn't going to be able to have much of a purpose unless there's some way of approaching it, especially on these very small parcels with an old building. So it's just as a way of sort of recapturing value. There won't be a lot of these across the county, but there's a handful of buildings where people really kind of run into a roadblock. So that's why it was proposed in the land use ordinance, and that's why this particular applicant, who's looking at the animal shelter, which really has a lot of limitations about what it could possibly be in the future, and that's why we're here, so.
Would this change the zoning of that particular property? Would this be would this be like a floating zone?
No, it's a use.
It's a use.
So somebody comes and they find a building in an agricultural zoning district, and they don't want to use it for whatever it was originally intended for. There isn't another use that fits, and they go, you know what, I think this would be a perfect spot to do whatever. And they come to the Board of Appeals and present their case. They present why it meets the, like I said, those general standards for a special exception, which really do look to kind of protect the surrounding area. And the Board of Appeals can decide if it's appropriate. We have a similar special exception already, which allows for the adaptive reuse of historic structures. A recent example of an adaptive reuse of a historic structure We've had a couple in the last few years. One was somebody had an old house, historic house. They don't want to live in the house, they didn't want to renovate the house, but it made a perfect home office. So they're building a brand-new house next door. They got the special exception for the adaptive reuse to turn the old house into storage space and their home office. We had another one where somebody took a residence, a historic residence, and they're now using it as a wine sampling facility. So those are kind of some of the examples. I think years ago, somebody took a barn and turned it into like their home decorating. They ran a home decorating business and converted a barn into that. So this would be similar, but specific to AZD.
And again, only for parcels under 20 acres, right? The way the code is set up, there's many, many uses for parcels that are over 20 acres because they would be a farm. But those uses aren't permitted on parcels under 20, so it really is a limited amount of choices. As opposed to the historic structure could be on any size property.
Correct.
Right,
But
that's
you
the
would have a
difference.
check and balance to, it has to go through the special appeal process, so they would have to justify it.
Right, and it would have to be, the Board of Appeals would have to find that it is a use that is appropriate in that location. So that's kind of the premise behind special exceptions, is that they're considered permitted, but because of some characteristic of them, you've got to make sure that they are appropriate in the location where somebody wants to put them.
And this would be for properties that are already 20 acres or less. You couldn't cut a corner or a piece out of a farm to do this?
Well, it would have to be an existing structure. So, we haven't discussed that.
But if you had a structure on a larger property, then it would be usable for all the different farm uses. You'd have a much lighter palette of uses to choose from. It's really the limitation of when a parcel is less than 20 acres, it can't be a farm.
But,
Right,
right,
but
although
that
you,
is wiggle room. That is possible. I guess you could
we
create
have,
it.
we have plenty of existing special exceptions in the agricultural zoning district that do require them to be in structures that existed as of August 1st, 1989. So you could certainly make a recommendation that you wanted some kind of limit if you really felt that it was something that could be abused and is appropriate.
So this is just allowing them to file for that exemption, and does that run back before this board if it's in an agricultural zone? Is it the same, or is it just through,
Right.
just through that process?
In general, you all are, give your opinion for when the law is going to change to set something up like this, or for agricultural projects. That's your other charge.
But not individual cases.
But not individual cases, correct, yeah.
Doesn't seem to be all bad, at least, I mean, a building, what's the other alternative? Nobody can do anything with it, it falls apart.
Correct.
And and having to go through the appeals, that sort of covers the backside of the county, correct? I mean, in other words,
Right, there's a board that evaluates it.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's what I'm-
correct. And can impose conditions as part of that process.
I'm okay with that.
Does anybody want to make a condition or just let it like this?
I move, can I move forward with this in their proposal?
Second?
Very much.
All in favor? Anybody opposed?
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. All righty, and now for the shortest item on our agenda.
Now we got to the fast part.
So before we begin, Chair called me earlier today and had some questions. We are not expecting you to come to a final recommendation this evening. You can set a schedule if you wish, or if you want to do an overview, you certainly can, finish business today. But the Planning Commission expects fully to take several meetings, and your recommendation would be brought before the Planning Commission, but they're not ready to do agriculture. They're going to start with process chapter tomorrow, and then they're going to talk about their schedule. So at some point, they'll be taking up agriculture. So there's not a rush for you to try to do that specifically tonight. So, and I'm happy to sort of walk through some of the highlights, and Carla can help me. There's a lot of things going on in the very biggest picture, right? There was a document brought forward to the task force in December that a consultant worked on, and there was a series of recommendations from the task force that the Planning Commission reviewed and made recommendations on those recommendations. And the document you have before you takes the consultant's work product, integrates the task force and Planning Commission's recommendations regarding specific text amendments, and incorporates some additional material put forward by staff based on what I like to call the 3-sentence instruction, streamline the process, which really took the most time. And then there's some ideas that came forward during that discussion. And last, and perhaps most importantly, we are moving into the legislative part of this process. So this is now the county commissioner's document. They sent it to the Planning Commission, to you all for recommendation, and they had some things that they wanted to see in it as well. For example, restaurants with drive-through facilities in the Route 301 corridor being added to employment center. That doesn't touch on what you're doing, but I just want to let you know there's some changes. The other piece is what we just talked about, the idea of, allowing some, that special exception for evaluation for properties under 20 acres. And there was some, what I would call sort of reorganization of the uses in the district. Animal husbandry is sort of a category so that all the uses related to animals, we hope, have been captured in that. So when people go to the code and they're looking for something, it's easier to find all of the things related to animals together. There's sort of a reorganization. I like to kind of reflect on, at one point there was a use called more than 4 horses. And I'm not really sure if you didn't know that was there, how you would find that in the list. So the goal was to make that list that's over time, 20 years of, amendments, that happens. And hopefully you've had a chance to maybe look at some of the strike through and underline provisions in the code. I don't want to do a comprehensive walkthrough through the whole thing unless you all want to. That would take a little time. I'm happy to do that. I don't know, how, Carla, what other highlights do you think are important regarding agriculture in particular?
I think the most sort of basic thing to understand about the ordinance is that this really was more of a streamlining and reorganization effort than kind of going through each district and all of the uses and adding stuff in, taking stuff out. As far as uses go, we really dealt with the ones that came up by either members of the task force or members of the public, and otherwise the uses remain the same. So most all of our zoning districts, I think, allow at least kind of, I'm going to say, crop agriculture, commodity. I mean, a lot of them don't allow the animal kind of poultry houses or more intense agriculture uses, but I think every district does at least allow non-animal agriculture. So that's still in there. We haven't changed that. I think we're hoping that it's going to be much easier for people to read and understand. And one of the biggest things that we've done, and you don't have the copy of the uses chapter, but you can find it online, is that all uses are now within their own section. And that was a really kind of eye-opening exercise to put them in alphabetical order and go, you know what, we have agriculture 3 different times and we've changed 1 or 2 words each time. And so we've kind of tried to take those and make them one version. Or, as Bill was mentioning, grouping all of the animal husbandry type uses. So it's stables, it's poultry houses, backyard chickens. There's a new use being added for sheep and goats, small ruminants. I think it has varied sort of how it's being termed. So those I think are some of the changes. I think if you were to read through the uses, that's where that chapter, you'd kind of get the best understanding of really what we've done. We didn't change densities, we didn't really change setbacks. The enclave provision is recommended to be pulled out of the ordinance. That is the sort of that density bonus if you cluster and you meet a set of design standards. It was used, I think, twice between 1989 and 2002, and it has not been used since then. But it is a provision that kind of was used when we were evaluating properties for conservation easements. No changes have been made to the 10% rule. You all participated in discussions of that at least once, if not more than once, over the last couple of years. That is in this draft ordinance as it currently stands, with no changes to any provision of that, so.
And agritourism has been added specifically to the code with the state definition, and wedding venues has been added as a special exception, as opposed to not at all, so. And Carl and I were talking a little earlier today about some of the implications of some of these changes, and I think all of them are, things that are sort of expected. I mean, agritourism is something that wasn't addressed that we wanted to address. Wedding venues is something that's come up many times and not addressed. But I think the thing that hasn't been part of the discussion that we had noted is removing enclaves. I mean, I think there was a real strong support for removing it, but it does affect or could affect mortgageability, right? That having, even if no one ever uses it, having that as something that's permitted on AZD land may affect the value of the land. And I know that for some farmers, I mean, every year there's some kind of working exchange with the bank for cash. So we don't know the ins and outs of that. We're hoping you all do. But I know that in some communities, there's permitted uses in agricultural land specifically because it sort of helps boost the value. So we don't want to inadvertently remove something. Everyone's like, well, we never used it, don't want to have that. And then it suddenly affects someone's ability to get a, year-to-year mortgage kind of situation, so.
You're saying that clusters was only used twice? Did I understand that?
That's correct.
Since
So,
89?
For actual on-the-ground subdivisions, yes.
So more than likely, it hasn't been a major thing in any way, and I don't think the banks probably are thinking in terms of that being, I don't know if that would really, what's your opinion? I don't think that's gonna hurt value. I think it protects the farm.
I don't think it'll hurt the values, because mostly what's driving land values in King County is the hunting industry. That's what drives property prices here in the county. The bulk of it.
Or the agricultural value.
Yeah, the agricultural value.
Okay, well, that's good news.
I don't think banks at this point in time are looking at the enclave density to determine value. Because most farmland that's selling around here is not selling for development.
it's not.
It's selling for ag use, so the ag use is still the highest and best and the highest value. Can you go over like what the red and the blue means in the actual document?
So red means language that to be added, and blue means language to be stricken.
Or relocated in some
Right,
instances.
or relocated. And in general, I mean, it's underline and strike through. The reason there's two colors is just sometimes underline and strike through doesn't pop out, but red and blue often are it's much easier to see what's happening at a glance. And as I think we talked about a little bit on the phone, this code has been majorly reorganized in every way. So there's lots and lots and lots of changes in the sense of where things are and how they're described, but these are really intended to be the substantive changes, right? Things that are new that you wouldn't find as an idea in the old code. So, and in some cases, there's even a highlight just to sort of say, hey, this one's something that might be of interest, so.
So for instance, the first one, about the 20 acres or larger in size, that's not a new idea. That already existed. It just moved to here.
You're talking about this adaptive reuse of existing structures.
No, it said
No,
in the very first
statement of
paragraph,
intent.
the first
Statement of
underlined
intent.
red.
So from my point of view, the statement of intent is a really important piece of each code. So these have all survived exactly as before. So changes to this, even just minor changes, are highlighted, right?
Okay.
Because it is setting forth what the entire rest of the section means. So, again, there's a little flex to do that, but yes, the idea is not new, but the fact that it appears in the statement of intent specifically is new, so. There's going to be some crossover with this, sorry.
No, that's fine. I was going to say, I think this ties into, if you were to look at the definitions, we have a definition of a farm. And a farm is that you're conducting agriculture and that you're at least 20 acres. So,
So we probably should read that section with the definitions, which is not one of the sections that we got.
no, I mean, honestly, I think there is probably stuff scattered throughout the document that does potentially apply to agriculture.
Absolutely.
We gave you sort of the agricultural zoning district and the resource conservation district, just the use matrix and the bulk standards. And I think you were sent links to the rest of the document. If anybody really wants to read it,
They were pretty overwhelming.
I'm sure they are. We can certainly, make copies available, if you want to spend some time in the library, there's a copy there. You can come sit in our offices and look through a copy if you really don't want all the paper. This is about 3/4 of it, and it's 270 pages. I think the total document's about 370, so.
And we know that a lot of people download things to look at it, and a lot of people print things. So we didn't want the packet to be 700 pages. So
Thank you.
that's why it's broken into pieces, so people can choose which parts they want to view.
I'm sorry?
Was there a definition you wanted to see?
No, not particularly. So do you guys want to go through line by line, or do you want to just go through things that you might have a question on?
I'm not so sure we need it for another meeting, just each individually have time to go through it and really read it, and then have another meeting.
And if there are, certainly, and if there are things that you as a group or even individually want more information on, you've got questions, we can certainly pull out specific items that you have of interest. Because again, almost 400 pages is a pretty overwhelming document.
And the actual proposal has been almost 3 years in the making, so there's a lot
Sure.
of ideas here.
I have a couple questions on like particular uses. Can we do that?
Sure.
So I am in the chart, and it says page 17 at the bottom.
Okay.
So we have all of these different animal husbandry things here that are listed separately.
Yeah.
And actually, by my definition in my head, swine would not fit anywhere because we're not a feedlot or confinement dairy, although that's the line I believe we belong on.
I think we generally classify you as feedlot, yeah.
I think we should change the wording to an animal feeding operation because that's how we are,
Confined housing is not a lot.
feedlot.
It's,
I agree.
And the state calls us all animal feeding operations through nutrient management, and everything we have to report is that way. And then there's a difference between an animal feeding operation and a confined, they're based on number units. So I know that's just a word, but
No, it's an important word. And that's exactly what we want to hear from you all.
And if we go with that definition, that would include like all livestock and poultry. Poultry falls into you're an AFO. Are there different requirements for a poultry house compared to the setbacks are the same, right?
The
Isn't it-
setbacks are the same.
Special exceptions are different, right?
That's the kind of thing where we would probably go, okay, well, let's pull out the actual standards in the uses
Right,
chapter
so that
and
was my
determine.
question. I thought if we make this AFO, But I think poultry and, I think this, everything would be the same, but I'm not positive on that.
And that's where we might need to actually kind of go, I'm actually, they're on opposite pages from each other, I'm looking at them now. And there are some slight differences between the two. But it may be more about differences in wording than actual kind of real distinctions between the uses.
Unless unless there's something about manure storage.
Right, which there is.
But I wouldn't,
Yes and no.
I mean, they all have to deal with that.
I mean, under poultry houses, it's manure storage sheds and compost are appropriate to the size of the operation will be included and will be constructed prior to receiving the first flock of chickens. Under feedlot or confinement dairy, it just speaks to the fact that the Board of Appeals can place additional restrictions on waste management, nutrient management plans for properties receiving waste. I don't see anything about waste management, but it should be in here, because it's important for both types of operations. So that's kind of one we did not catch when we were kind of trying to go, are there uses that are essentially the same and should have similar standards? So that might be something we want to take a look at.
So if I can just ask a clarifying question. So instead of just the title, instead of animal husbandry, feedlot, or confinement dairy, it would be spelled out, animal husbandry, AFO and CAFO?
It would be animal feeding operations. I think
So-
it would be AFO, AFO,
sorry,
but
I'm
you
not
would
saying right,
spell out,
AFO.
you would write out
Right.
animal feeding operation.
Right.
You might
And-
put AFO.
AFO, and would you also have the other with the confined, both? Would that be for both?
No, it's the same.
It's the same? Oh, so there really isn't any difference between the two?
Well, it's based on size.
Okay.
It's based on size, and I don't think
I just want to make sure we don't leave out some other operation, but, you know, in doing that.
Under a
So-
MAFO, a Maryland feeding operation, there's a CAFO.
Right, that's it, thank you.
yes.
But you're saying
An everybody is an animal feeding operation.
everybody's an
but
animal feeding
If you get to
operation,
a certain size, you're then considered a CAFO.
but not everyone is a CAFO.
Correct.
Right, okay. Well, and we can spell that out in the uses, if that's what we intend. Right,
So-
perfect, thank you very much.
And then I wonder if that, like, the one that says animal husbandry farms, including horses, like, what does that mean? Is
Yeah, and
that
then you've got horses down at the bottom of the animal, and you got horses.
Part of the purpose is, there's a lot of different categories currently sprinkled about. This preserves all the existing categories and renames them. So there were categories that had very fine distinctions between them and were separate uses. And the idea was to make sure that the things that people would recognize as their own would still be here, unless we were very, very clear about actually combining things.
Right. Well, and I think the animal husbandry farm, including horses, is keeping, dairying, or raising for sale of animals, fish, birds, horses, or reptiles on 20 acres or more, is meant to encompass the person who has 5, 10 goats, 5,
Well, no, because you have small sheep or goats as another use.
But the small sheep or goats are on the properties that are under 20 acres.
Oh,
And
okay.
if you actually,
The non-farm.
if you went into the specifics on the uses, you would start to tease out what those differences are. So the animal husbandry farm, including horses, is meant to capture the people who really aren't the animal feeding operations. They're not large enough to hit that category, but they do have animals. So,
Yeah, and I think another piece of this is throughout the entire code, right? As you move from AZD to, let's say, marine at the other end, there's less and less animals permitted, and each one of those has separate categories. But the idea is in AZD, all of those things are permitted, so that they all kind of stack up and they're like, gee, these are all, because they start thinning out as you move through other zoning districts, if that
Yeah.
helps.
Okay.
And we can certainly look at, making the nomenclature maybe a little sharper so that it doesn't, so that it seems more mutually exclusive and not as, overlapping.
Yes.
But again, it does reflect a lot of other districts and their uses.
And then when we go farther down on the list, animal husbandry was all pulled up here in red, but poultry houses still exist in black, and they're not crossed out.
Okay, that would be an error.
It would be
That's
on
an error.
page 19.
Yep, that's an
Yep,
error.
That's just an error. Thank you.
And then the poultry houses on parcels where owner cannot handle the waste, is that gonna go, that's gonna all go back to being part of the AFO, right? That's really a no-land poultry farm, that's what we would refer to it as.
Right, I think that's, we left that in there, because, there are various poultry operations where either somebody wants to have more houses than what they can handle, and obviously, the industry has changed, but we were still kind of, like Bill mentioned, trying to have that continuity of where we were in 1989, even where we still kind of were in 2002, and poultry litter and how it's treated and utilized is very different than it was 20 years ago.
Which I feel is more of a nutrient management plan question than a zoning question.
And so, I'm getting the sense that we might actually have almost a meeting that's going to deal with teasing out how, at
Animal
least in AZD, some of these animal uses should be recommended for approval.
Okay, that's fine. And specifically on the poultry houses with the litter and not having enough land to spread them, I think there was discussion at the task force about not making that a requirement, because, in the modern world, there's a market for it and it sells, and you don't need to worry about that. And I think when we sort of went over to staff, that's what it is right now. What if that market collapses? What if suddenly litter once again becomes something you've got to dispose of? We didn't want to remove safeguards in the code. So if right now there's a market and there's no problem, you can sell it, great. But if that were to go away, then the current language in the code anticipates there being an issue. Is that a fair way to
I think so.
summarize it?
But
But don't you have to get your CAFO permit
As being
first?
a part of that,
Yes.
my land I may be able to build it and meet the qualifications, because my land is plenty capable of handling all the nutrients off that farm. Well, after a while, depending on what nutrients are building up in the soil, all of a sudden, I go from being able to handle it
To not.
to having to export it. So there's, short of getting rid of agriculture altogether, there's no way to safeguard what? against that.
why don't we have a discussion on it?
Yeah, I'd like to be part of,
Well,
I
no,
think-
this board will be part of that.
I think we need to look at the animal husbandry
And I
uses in
think-
particular.
I think we need to provide you with the pages that list out all of those conditions, so you're not just looking at them in a vacuum of the,
Right, like,
of what we consider
That we're
sort of the
looking for,
simplified, truncated.
And I mean, they are on the other link, but we can pull those out as
Yeah.
well, so to
Yeah.
highlight.
I
We
see
have
that
them right here too.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
So,
Okay.
because there's,
I mean, this.
it has
this-
ripple effects as soon as we start making these kinds of little changes. We've got to then go, all right, how does the definition change? How do the special exception, where do we have to make changes and what? So it's,
And I think this is a primary reason why this group exists, right? I mean, AZD is the largest land use in the county, agriculture is a premier use in the county, and planners who are non-farmers need help from farmers who are farmers.
sure. Does anybody else have any questions?
Not
I do
currently.
think it does need a meeting, because
Yeah.
it's an awful lot.
It's a lot. and we
My
need to
brain's
sit
not
and
big
read
enough
through
to
everything.
handle all this.
But are there other topics that we need to cover besides animal uses, animal husbandry?
The elimination of sewage, sludge, land applications, that's being scratched out altogether.
that is being scratched out because, losing the term. The state took it over.
Oh.
What's the word for that? Preempted. Our regulations have been preempted by state regulations. And so, our, special exception for that, we can't enforce. So,
Because originally, I think that was put there to prevent, it was a couple companies coming out from over DC area, BioSludge, it was another one, bringing municipal waste out that was high components of toxic minerals and everything else. Heavy metals, and trying to prevent that from being put on productive agricultural land.
right, and again, through actions of either the General Assembly or the courts, and I don't remember which one, it may even be both, MDE regulations take precedence over ours. And so there are a couple things like that. Sand and gravel pits are another one that in certain aspects of what we regulate on those are preempted by state law and decisions by the court system, that even if we have those standards, we're not allowed to enforce them because somebody else is responsible for doing that.
Pulling up my phone, because would you all like to set a date, or at least a possible date for when you would meet again? I'm sort of looking at October, and is Wednesday a good night in general? I don't know. We did sort of a doodle poll, and this kind of came up, but we really weren't setting this is the best time for everyone. So maybe we can sort of have that discussion and be ready.
The second Wednesdays I can't do.
Can't do second Wednesdays, okay?
The rest of the board needs to do it that day, I just wouldn't be here.
Wednesdays are not a good day for me.
Okay.
But I'm just one person.
The only day we can't commit to is Tuesday, because that's Board of County Commissioners Day, so, and they meet almost every Tuesday. But other than that, every other day would be open. So for the evening, we don't have,
Third Mondays aren't open.
third Mondays are not open, thank you, yes. The Board of Appeals would feel crowded, yeah.
You're looking, just October is what you're saying? It has to,
It doesn't have to be, it could be, I don't know how much time you all want to sort of individually study and look at it. You all can pick the time.
Are you gonna be heavy into the fields, or is harvest gonna start before all?
I think harvest is gonna be before.
It's gonna start pretty soon,
This
right?
week is fixing a lot of it.
yeah.
So is that implying that going later in October is better?
I hate to say it, but it probably would be better, but,
You might
You
want
know,
to punt to
I think we're gonna
November.
hit harvest is gonna be long this year, so.
You might want to
gonna hit
default
it.
to November. You might want to default to November.
Can they wait that long?
yeah,
Can
but
you?
you can't wait that.
I don't think you wanna wait that long.
Why don't
I
you
think-
tell us when
Let's
you
try,
need it
I mean,
by?
this is important. Let's try to meet in October.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah, you have a good
if
point
we
there.
can't
You do have a good
get a
point.
quorum, we'll have to, is that okay with you? I don't have to be in a combine.
I prefer it on Monday.
I'll need a break.
You prefer a Monday?
Monday,
Okay.
okay. Mondays are, except for the third Monday, Mondays are generally open for us. That's the third Monday is the Board of Appeals, so
Second Monday.
Which might be a holiday.
it is October 9th.
That's a Columbus Day, so.
Oh, so that's not a good one.
I'll work on Columbus Day.
Is there a fourth Monday?
You mean you don't
There
take-
is.
you
The
don't take every
23rd is the
Columbus Day
fourth
off
Monday.
on-
There's 1, 2, 3.
October
four,
23rd?
5 Mondays.
Yeah, it is.
23rd, that's a Monday?
That's
Yes,
a
sir.
It
Monday.
is a Monday.
Is that the third or fourth?
I think
Fourth.
that's the fourth.
Fourth.
Yeah. Good with me.
Okay. Is this time, is 6 PM good? Do you prefer earlier, later?
6:30 would be easier. I don't have to rush quite so fast.
Okay, that's fine. You all can set whatever time you like.
Is 6 fine?
6:30, 6:30 is fine.
Okay.
We'll accommodate the dairy guy.
I had to
And
hustle.
girl.
And before you close, I don't know if you wanted to invite members of the public to speak, if anyone had something to speak on this item.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that has a comment on this section? Or anybody on the phone? Maybe. Okay, I don't see anybody jumping to the front.
That was quick.
Or hollering on the phone, so if there, is that it for tonight?
You've covered the items on your
Okay.
agenda, yes, Madam Chair?
Is there a motion to adjourn?
They did at the very beginning.
At the beginning, yeah, it's okay. Yeah. We have other boards that always do that at the end, so, yeah. But you all did it at the beginning, so that's great.
Okay,
I do have one question.
okay.
The major issue we had with the solar farm, or not farm, but the 5 acres there, still farm. Trying to decide where the wording was not adequate to say that all the buffers and nursery stock had to be included or not included in the 5 acres. Has that been addressed to correct it future going, to not have that issue again?
So how it had sorted out is the 5 acres is whatever is within the perimeter fence.
Yeah.
So the landscaping is outside of the 5 acres, but the fence, which is generally the very outside edge of the facility, is all included in the 5 acres. So that's
Finding
where
whether
they-
you changed it to make it included or not going forward. Because we couldn't do it, we couldn't change it after they applied. So I was just curious how that was.
Before that, it was less defined. It could be interpreted as just the panels themselves, or the panels and the equipment, or maybe the perimeter row. So by making it the perimeter fence, there's an actual physical object that defines the edge. And that's usually the very outside edge of the facility, except the landscaping. So that's where it ended up. Yeah, we really appreciate your help and discussion on those kind of items. It's really informative.
Okay.
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Yay.
Thank you all very, very much.